Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with me, Kevin Britz, proudly powered by leadershipbydesign.co, leading the charge with insights, information, and ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's marketing and leadership segment, marketing communications expert and co-host Craig Pagely. How are you doing, Craig?
Kevin, I'm great. Yeah, great to be chatting in this very important week in South Africa's history, voting day coming up. And while it is expected that the ruling party will remain in majority vote, I really think we're going to see some interesting coalitions form. And who knows, in sort of 2 weeks' time when the final results come out, we may be facing a very different future. Exciting times ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned last week, it's our first our first election that we'll have in the show.
True.
It's going to be interesting, yeah. And I'm looking forward to watching some of the politics on TV. People look quite strenuous about their positions that they're holding, but I think that's it's going to make for some interesting television watching, at least.
Yes. So just to reiterate on this voting thing, yeah, we did touch on this a little while ago. In the year of 2024, there's over 2 billion people around the world that are having the chance to cast a vote this year. That's a substantial percentage of humanity.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a beautiful opportunity for the world also to redirect to where we choose to go, right?
So over 50 countries getting to vote in 2024.
Yeah, that's a massive direction. It's amazing. Craig, so last week we had a good conversation about the 10 shifts that we are transforming around transforming organizations. Not we are, but we are as well. But I recall last week you mentioned that we have an interesting guest joining us. So please share with the listeners what we're going to be discussing and introduce our special guest.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So we definitely have a great guest joining us today, but firstly, we're going to discuss the increasingly important topic of the war for talent. And our special guest, Shaun Raaff, who's the CEO of Humanity, the employee experience company, is very well versed on this important topic and definitely the right guy to be taking us through the thinking. So firstly, Shaun, welcome to the show. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on how organizations can best prepare themselves in winning the war for talent.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, guys. Yeah, nice to be here. Like, I'm not generally at the front of these conversations. We normally have like war rooms here at the office, which I love being involved in. So being at the front here is a little different for me. So that's but cool. I'm happy to be here. The topic is a form of passion, so I may get heated and I have like some strong feelings about this thing. So yeah, let's hope I can be of value.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you, Shaun. Thanks for joining us. Craig, I know that you have our first question for today, and kick it off.
Yeah, so before I get into that, I really just like to do a bit more of a formal introduction and let our listeners know who we're talking to and give a little bit of a background to Shaun. So Shaun Raaff is the CEO of Humanity, which is a specialist consulting business that focuses on the entire employee experience value chain, from recruitment to talent management to the all-important employer branding proposition, all very critical components for organizations wanting to retain existing talent and attract best fit new talents. Shaun co-founded Humanity in 2015 after a stint as a recruitment consultant at the well-known Roger Walters. And Shaun was appointed to the role of CEO in June 2018. Two really good insights here. Shaun completed his B-Psych honors in 2010, graduating, take note, with cum laude. And Shaun also has a B Arts in sports psychology. So formal welcome again, Shaun.
Thanks, Craig. It was a cum laude, not to what my dad's expectations were. That was a shocker to the family tree. So
claim it. You earned it. Claim it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay. I see. I'm going to ask you questions here. So, Shaun, I'd like to kick off with the first question on which I'm intrigued to hear about the link from sports psychology to recruitment and talent management. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so the sports psychology thing is an interesting one. I did an undergrad in sports psychology, and in South Africa, you can't actually specialize in sports psychology. So you can be counseling psychology, clinical psychology, industrial psychology, and sports wasn't it. And I'm a sports mad. I wanted to be in sports. I wanted to be in sports teams. And at the time while I was studying, I had got involved in schools and sort of in school coaching and school sports management, etc. And so I actually started off creating let's call it a performance consultancy that underpinned sports psychology as its philosophy in terms of performance, right? And so I worked mostly in schools because, ironically, they were open to this idea of sports psychology. And when I approached like the Lions cricket or the Lions rugby, I got sort of shushed away, this like psychology voodoo. And this was, sort of like the early 2000s. And so it's interesting. I try to claim that I was before my time, but I just don't think that I was very good at selling what I did, truthfully. And so the link between sports psychology is as I said, I wasn't very good at selling what I was doing. I believed in what I did. So like working in sports teams, in terms of like what the background of sports psychology is really around performance. It takes performance psychology or sports psychology, and really it's about getting the best out of a group of people. It's pretty simple. And I then needed to try and make some money. And my wife was pregnant and we were trying to buy a house. And so I phoned a buddy and I said, shit, I want to go. I need to make some money. Here's my skill set. What do you think? And he went, HR could maybe be something. And I had no idea what HR, I had no corporate background. And he went, but you know what you could do? Like you're quite personable. Why don't you come and be a recruiter with me? And so that's how I ended up at Robert Walters. And so I ended up in recruitment and spent a year in Robert Walters, which is a big global recruitment firm. And, from 1 year of recruitment experience, decided starting my own business again was a good idea, which we did. But not to take too much of a long story, but I think being a recruiter is the best MBA that somebody could ever do. Like if you don't have the money to go to Gibbs, go and recruit for a year on a generalist desk, because what it does is it teaches you, you have to interview hundreds of people who are candidates in specific jobs across different industries, across different skill sets. And you have to interview lots of hiring managers about the people they want for the things that they need to get done, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that first year of being a generalist recruiter at a big global firm was an amazing entry point for me into corporate. And it taught me a lot of like what happens inside HR. And I started like making all these connections. It's like, oh shit, like HR is in charge of like leadership and sports psychology and teams, and, so you start to see all these connections. And, after, humanity did predominantly recruitment for the first year or two, but then, as my passion in terms of like performance and teams and leadership all started making these things into like what HR does for businesses, we started building out projects inside businesses that I could, make these alignments to. So that's the link. It's a bit of a wobbly line, but I suppose there's not many straight lines in life, but I've now become kind of like a really, really broadly passionate, like sort of understanding person of like what HR should be doing for businesses. But have surrounded myself with these like experts in all of their fields, organizational design, talent management, recruiters, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I've found myself in probably the best job in the world, because I just get to be broadly involved with lots of cool stuff and not necessarily have to sell myself as an expert at any of them, So that's how we sit at the moment.
Brilliant. Shaun, talking about the wobbly line, let's get to a bit of a straight line here. So in our conversation last week, people and talent were often referenced in the 10 shifts that are transforming organizations. And I thought that you could really give us some insights into these topics and provide a few pointers for our listeners to ensure that their respective organizations are better positioned to attract and retain the right talent. So for your benefit, as you were part of the chat last week, the 10 shifts that were identified as transforming organizations are listed as follows. The first year is increasing speed, strengthening resilience. The second is true hybrid, the new balance of in-person and remote work, a topic that you and I are definitely quite interested in. Third year is making way for applied AI, another one of your sweet spot conversation opportunities. The fourth year is the new rules of attraction, retention, and attrition. Fifth, closing the capability chasm. Sixth, walking the talent tightrope. All of those very pertinent to today's conversation. The seventh is leadership that is self-aware and inspiring. The eighth is making meaningful progress on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ninth, mental health, investing in a portfolio of interventions. And 10th, efficiency reloaded. So with these in mind, can you open the conversation on the war for talent by giving some context to what the statement actually means and why it's important in today's business world?
Yeah, cool. I think, look, I think the statement is broad, right? Like war on talent is also interpreted differently depending on like sort of the angle at which you're looking at it. But I think, as I see it, right, like the war on talent, like the more, and I'm going to base a lot of our conversation, a lot of my insights are going to be based on the experiences we see, right? I mean, I don't necessarily want to pretend that I'm a know-it-all and I have all the answers, etc. I can only speak from experiences that we see inside of our business, right? And a huge piece of our business is in recruitment. So we've got a 15 man and woman team that are involved in talent acquisition across industries and across sort of skills, etc. So from insurance to mining to FMCG to financial services, etc. So when I hear war on talent, what I see the most of is businesses all struggling to fulfill scarce skills needs. So like I think that there's like, if you speak to hiring managers, it's like there's nobody out there, there's not enough skills. And I think there's a different feeling on what war of talent means in terms of like South Africa to what the global thing might feel. I mean, we speak to like the South African, our customer market, going, yes, and we're losing these people to overseas, and people are immigrating, and not only are they immigrating, they're now working for overseas customers for dollars. And so when you talk war on talent, for specifically, and I want to talk more to like scarce skills. So you talk about like digital, IT, you talk about engineering, you talk about like sort of, so you talk about scarce skills as the sort of target of that. So everybody's fighting for the same people. And the war for me is like, well, what are businesses prepared to do to get that person in their business? So that's what I, foresee this as, and like, whether that's they're prepared to pay more, they're prepared to, do more for that person, they're prepared to show them a career path, et cetera. And so the war is like, what are businesses doing to make themselves the best place to want to go to? Because candidates that are scarce have got options. And I think that there's been a huge flip over the last maybe 20, 30 years. And obviously I wasn't in the corporate market 20 years ago, so I can't speak to before my time. I can only speak to the experiences of our customers who were, is that the talent market is there used to be lines out the door, when there were adverts for Standard Bank, or, there were lists of people who were wanting that job. Whereas the sort of tables have flipped, where like scarce skills have got the options, and quite truthfully, they have a very, very, very like broad, they can go to the places that they want. Like if I was speaking to somebody in the tech world the other day, like if you're a technical JavaScript person, you could go into LinkedIn and there's 100 jobs, and if you're good enough, you're likely to be able to choose whichever one of those you want. So companies now are really, really, really like forced to have to be like super creative, and I think like have got to dig a little deeper to have to like make themselves the place to want to be. And I think that the best employer and all the cuck that gets driven out there, I think that people have seen through that now. Like whereby you can have a thing that says best employer, but like you can go into a million places on the internet to figure out if somebody really is the best place to work for. So that's how I see war on talent. And I think that and it's a pretty gnarly place at the moment.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. And what you make some reference to key points which came out of another fascinating article, this time from Indeed.com, where you're talking about the likes of the shift to qualified jobs, definitely the increase in competition. Globalization has fundamentally played a big role here. Important, a topic that really is close to my heart is the change in values of the organization, values of the candidates. Are they aligned? Are they mismatched? Change in demographics. We're seeing there's growth in different parts of the world, in different regions, across different industry sectors. So you're seeing very different impact on demographics around the world. And then obviously the current realm of me first is really an important one in the psychology of employees. And delving into some of the psychology aspects with the background that you have, and taking the other points into account, what do you believe out of those is most important for organizations to address in ensuring that they're able to stand out from the competition, and why?
Sure. So I think that is too loaded in a way, like, because I think that there's some like interesting things that we look at in terms of like, there's, as you mentioned earlier, around like the sort of talent brand, or employer brand sort of space. But then, so when you talk about employer brand, but then you really start to be specific about the talent brand, which is you've got to want to be the thing you need to be to the people you want, and then not to everybody. And so there's like, there's, and just, I think that there's horses for courses. And so, like I said, I think that question is loaded. I think it's more about like how specific you want to be around like, and how badly you need what you need, right? And like how deep you're prepared to go to get it. Does that make sense? Like, I don't want to like be a wishy-washy there, but I think that that's such a complicated question. Knowing that, you can work with companies that are, there's such high demand in specific skills, right? And then you can start to be like, the company's really like, sorry, you're going to have to forgive my ADHD. Like I'm in about 7 places in my brain, but I don't think that there's an answer, but let me rather get there, because I think we'll get better into a conversation. I don't think there's an answer to your question, because I think that it's more about being like really specific about like what are our like non-negotiables in terms of like, as we take our business forward, what do we really need, and then how do we need to transform the way in which we see that? Because I think that that's a big part of this question, is being able to change the way that historical leadership sees this problem.
Yes.
Like I think that, and you would have, from a leadership perspective, I'm sure you guys would have seen it, right? Like it's a hard thing to change. Old dogs, learn new tricks hard, like the hard way, and so like there's a cool thing around like, what is this new talent market demanding, and how do you change that perspective from the top, and I think that there's a really, really cool piece in there, around that preparedness to change. And
talking to that point, the real reality here is the nature of jobs needed for new business into the future has changed. And it's about what do organizations do to understand what that exact need is, and then go and find the linkage to bring the right talent into it. The other key thing that I mentioned there, just changing in values. I think that the reality of the way the world is evolving coming out of COVID, the focus on purpose-driven organizations, the focus on sustainability, the focus on environmental aspects as well, they're very much values-driven, and many of the organizations are having to really do some deep navel gazing to understand where they stand in this regard, and fix their own view to the world before they can attract anybody else in.
Yeah, and just to that point, because that old saying that like, because why does it matter? Because it matters. It matters to these. This new generation of employee coming in. Like, well, like it's hard for like somebody, the work from home thing that was a part of those things. This new hybrid workforce. Like to a younger generation of people who are super smart and get shit done, and even though they're smarter in terms of getting stuff done, and the older guys who need to feel like they're in the office. Look at this drive in South Africa for businesses going straight back to the office full time, and not really having a reason why, other than the old dogs not feeling good about the old way, right? And so that's just a really, really nice example of the preparedness to change. And that's just, it's not a tiny, it's a huge topic, this hybrid workforce and like work from home policies. And in our recruitment business, like you want to talk about like a value proposition to a up and coming, talent or like scarce skill, tell them they've got the hybrid opportunity and they can work from home and they get the benefits of both, versus, going to one of the big businesses down the road and when they go, what's the hybrid work policy? And they go, no, it's an all-in policy. And they go, no, thanks, that's cool, I'm going to go next door.
Yeah.
But just to touch on that question, Shaun, I think that's also one of the things that's, Craig and I have often spoken about, is the importance of what cultures look like in organizations, because, and that's why tomorrow, because we're recording this, tomorrow is such a big day for South Africa's politics, because the representation of what leadership is in the country is also not wonderful, so when we look at leadership and what we should be looking up to, and what young businesses and young business leaders could be doing in the world currently, the leadership that they have as representation sucks, so you kind of go, first of all, it's really important. And like you say, it's quite a complex conversation to have, and you can't just have it sort of in a blanket statement. But also, in context to South Africa, where we have such a bad record of creating jobs, there's definitely a war on talent, right? There's absolutely a war on talent because people are happily moving, abroad, because why the hell would they stay, right? So in context to South Africa, we have a big problem, but we also, we have the capacity to change that by making different moves in our country, and that's also, highlighting that as an awareness for organizations and business owners out there.
Yeah, no, you did right. And what I've been trying to do in the back of my mind is like keep coming back to the sentence of like war on talent, and like listening to your guys' thoughts and comments, and then coming back to war on talent. And I think that like as we've been, as we keep talking about this, like really, because war on talent touches everything.
Yeah,
right? Like,
it does.
And it's just interesting to me that like if we had to really keep coming back to the point, I think it's like we will keep coming back to the like it's what businesses are prepared to do to make sure that they are the place that people want to go to, and all these things we talk about, right? Like highlighting leadership, being like from an employer brand perspective, your leadership models, your, like the, how do we create these, like the how do we create these paths for career paths for people in our businesses, et cetera, and we spoke to a lady who's the head of talent acquisition at Nedbank not too long ago, and she was just talking about like how a lot of businesses also have like missed the understanding between critical skills and scarce skills. Like there's an interesting stat specifically in like South Africa. We like I think there's I don't want to be quoted on this, but there's like a crazy stat that like 60% of graduates that come out of university don't find a job within a year, right? Wow. Like I think I hope let's assume that that's even somewhere correct, right? So there are criticals. I mean, these are kids coming with, like BComs and, like smart, like skills. So like there's, so businesses that need like this entry level talent, there's a plethora, you know what I mean? There's like just so much young, smart, available, cheap talent that like businesses can get, but that doesn't necessarily fulfill the skills or the scarce skills gap that these guys have got. And so it's like this, businesses, I think that also like kind of get like lost in the in the mud a little bit as to like what is this war about and who's it for, sort of thing, and like the scarce skills that, I mean, like I promise you, my recruiters, we are the busiest we've ever been in a world where like there's fewer jobs, and it's because everybody's got the same problem. Like they've got these jobs in their businesses that they desperately need getting done, and there's not enough people to get them done, and it's been like, it fascinates me, and like recruitment in particular, I feel is my, if you ask me, and like, Craig spent a lot of time with me, like my biggest passion in the whole world is recruitment in general. Like, so talent acquisition as a silo, not just recruiters and recruitment, but like talent acquisition, in terms of like how it isn't more of a passion for executives and businesses, and how it isn't like as important as like marketing or learning, you know what I mean? Like it's a crazy thing to me that people aren't obsessed about recruitment, and aren't obsessed about this thing, because like it's for me the biggest competitive advantage you could have right now is to be flipping good at recruiting, and the journeys and the experiences you're bringing in people, because it creates advocacy with, all these scarce skills. They all kind of hang out together. They're on the same platforms, and they're at the same bras, or they're gaming in the same place, or coding in the same hackathons, or whatever it is. And like, if you recruit brilliantly, even if for the guys who don't get the job, but they talk about these experiences through recruitment, like you start to win war on talent without even trying. And there's like such a competitive advantage to be had in the recruitment space, I think. I mean, it's a space that I don't think a lot of people spend enough time in.
Yeah.
I want to just ask a question around the missing part that we have on our list of questions, Shaun. What do you think, some of the factors are that organizations and leaders are missing? What are they not paying attention to? Because I think they very often go by the book and they do what's necessary.
Yeah.
And they get caught up with the busyness and the minutiae of life and everything. But what are they missing? From a recruit, like it being your passion, that must be something that you're picking up that people are simply not seeing.
Yeah, and this might sound too simple, but because it's hard and it takes time, and I think that in services, right? So so we work in a services environment here. So recruitment, or whether you've got internal recruiters in your business or whatever, this is a services thing, and if you think about how hard excellent service actually is, it's we've become so accustomed to average service, and when you become accustomed to us average service, it kind of just spreads like a cancer, these, and I mean, we in our recruitment business, when I talk to these guys around the having to do the hard things all the time, and that means when you're interviewing candidates and you're going through the details of every job they ever did and trying to make sure that and when you're writing your reports for your customers, is to sort of here are your 5 CVs, here are the comparison analysis, 5 candidates, here are the things that you might want to point out, here are some interview guide questions for your 5 candidates based on, and because it takes so much time to be excellent in recruitment. I'm not even talking about a recruitment business customer relationship. I'm talking even about an internal HR team running internal processes, having hiring managers. I heard a stat from one of our banks the other day that their average time to hire from when a job gets listed to when they close it is 150 days. 150 days to fill a role that role can't obviously be that flippant critical to your business if after 150 days, nobody was panicked enough to get this thing done. But you get what I'm saying? There's so much opportunity, and because I think recruitment requires huge amounts of attention to detail, it also is working with the most unpredictable thing on earth called a human being. And there's, you've got 3 sets of unpredictable people. You've got a hiring manager who's unpredictable. You've got a bunch of candidates who are unpredictable, and then you've got the person in the middle trying to process this all, and with all of our biases and all of, and with all of our human natures that come through recruitment processes. And I mean, we were talking with we've been trying to partner with a tech business earlier just around building more robust robust sort of recruitment tools for businesses to sort of alleviate biases. And we were talking how many times have you guys sat in on interviews or seen interview processes happen when categorically that an interview, and let's call this at a senior level, a candidate earning $1 million a year or more, and that when they've gone into this interview that there's a high likelihood that the interviewer hasn't actually gone into the details of that CV, hasn't really prepared for that interview. They then have this kind of sporadic interview, which maybe talks about the rugby over the weekend and, some their classmates that they probably might have had at Stellenbosch and yada, 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 yada. And then that interview happens, and after an hour of interviewing, the candidates maybe had airtime in terms of speaking of their experiences of 15 minutes. From those 15 minutes, they get shortlisted to maybe go to the next round. And then in the next interview, there's no real connection between what happened in this interview to the next interview. Then, and then when it comes down to the interviewing committee, they've got no centralized, absolute non-biased kind of ways of deciding as to whether this is the best candidate for this job or not. So, and I mean, shit, this is such a simple example of just the basics of recruitment, but yet we somehow just take recruitment for granted. And if we're talking war on talent, everybody's oh my God, we can't find enough skills. But then in our recruitment processes, we don't create strategies and robust sort of processes to ensure that this is a slick, smart, because we're going to hire a person into this business who not only is going to earn $1 million a year or $2 million a year or whatever it is, they're also going to be the determining factors to whether this business makes 200 or 20.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's that's for me when you talk war on talent. Well, that's why it matters, it's because and I don't think we take it seriously enough. I just think we weirdly don't. We just weirdly think that recruitment's just we need a bum in a seat. We need this thing done. We need this job done. And we know that it's hard to get them, but we haven't really, really, really thought enough about why and how's this person going to make the impact and, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I could go on forever as to why I think there's so much opportunity in the space.
But what I like about your reply there, Shaun, is you picked up on a range of critical points, which is a perfect segue into one of the other shifts that really stood out for me from last week's conversation, and in that conversation was shift number 5, titled "Closing the Capability Chasm." And I want to just read from a paragraph from this particular point. And the key statement from this reads as follows: to achieve a competitive advantage, organizations need to build institutional capability that is an integrated set of people, processes, and technologies that collectively create value by enabling the organization to do something consistently better than its competitors do. That means plugging gaps in their core activities, which are often the result of insufficient resources or inconsistent commitment. Now, what can organizations do to ensure that they have that right fit resource in place as part of their need for the right institutional capabilities?
So it's also deep. It's also a broad question. But maybe a way for me to answer is that we've in the same conversation that we've just been having, which our conversation started in recruitment, and then we started talking about like the amount of data that sits inside of businesses through people, like people data. Let's call it HR data, call it people data, and that sort of stuff. And we were saying, imagine, and this is all like we were literally like throwing hypothetical questions against the wall. I mean, it's been amazing working with this dude who's he's a platform developer, and it's just been amazing like trying to develop ideas around people data. What are the opportunities inside of institutions around the data that we have? And we were saying that imagine if you had to start like an organization, like almost like an OD process or an organizational design sort of process, whereby you've got the structure of your organization. So theoretically, I mean, if you've got a good solid HR, you'll have a good at least an organogram of your business, right? You'll have hierarchies, you'll have sort of roles and things like that. Attached to that, you should theoretically have a job description for each of the roles inside. Theoretically, like there's a lot of openness there to a lot of how I'm pot kettle black. I mean, I've probably as a startup, even though we're 10 years, probably fall under our own trap here. So I don't want to come across as a nerd. But so in your organogram, you've then got all of your job descriptions. Everybody in your organization should theoretically have a CV. And so it'd be and then theoretically they should have a performance management of sorts. You should have some way of like having navigated the performance of this person, KPIs or whatever it might be. And we were saying, imagine being able to plug. So you could take a business, and he was saying that like the way in which AI has gone, in terms of like building institutional knowledge is like, well, then let's see what like the job descriptions of people say, overlapped with the CVs that they have, overlapped with the KPIs and performances that they do. And I wonder what comes out here, because like I think that there's a lot of information, and then there's very, very few businesses who will have that data in one place. Or none that and we consult into big businesses, and we've never seen anything nearly as robust as that. So your point there around like building those capabilities is that like I think that all of the information or a lot of the information sits there. It's that I don't think a lot of businesses know how to utilize that. And I think that a big cause of that is that HR departments have never been built around the capabilities that it now actually requires. So, HR departments are structured, and you'll have like an HR director or a CHRO or whatever you want to call them. And then you'll have a bunch of HR business partners, and then you'll have a bunch, so you'll have these roles, but like, you don't really see HR departments being structured with like HRDS for like HR data scientist, HR, it's a business analyst, and so it's interesting to see how like all this data sits inside HR departments, but we don't really have the skill sets inside the traditional HR profession that can utilize these skills. And, quite frankly, you probably don't see the best data scientists. You see the best data scientists sitting in the finance team. They're sitting there because they think that that's obviously where the value sits. And I don't think that they're wrong, but I don't think that they're seeing the opportunities to like in what and how much they could create in terms of value in the data that sits with people, and inside the people organization. So I don't know if I've answered that in any way, shape, or form. I think you can see kind of where I think that there's opportunity, and not necessarily one that we've solved, but something that we're definitely trying to like every day in terms of our R&D space.
But what's great is you absolutely get the construct of people, process, and technology as being this collective to enabling the organizations to demonstrate and deliver better value. And when HR teams get that seat around the table and are seen in light of contributing to the strategy of the organization and having input and proximity to processes and technology, we're definitely going to see better value and less insufficient resources and gaps in business delivery.
I think that a lot of like HR stuff, you know, we were trying to figure out our own positioning as to like why would people want to buy us, or why would people want to, you know, that old saying that's like, what's the most important thing in your business? And that, you know, that what's the most people, and they're like, our people are our most important asset, you know, like they are these things. And then you go like, well, then who's in charge of this asset? Well, it's our HR department. Well, then how capable is this HR department do you feel at looking after the most important asset? And, you know, and what's the gap? So maybe they're good and they're a 7, but like, what are they then choosing? But surely your most important asset you want looked after by a 10 out of 10 department, you know? And so it's more me not saying that like HR is crap. It's more me saying that I think that there's more capability that you could utilize inside HR. And then HR departments have been traditionally, let me not speak for everybody, but I think that HR as a brand is not utilized because we don't do very well at creating value, you know, or
demonstrating the creation of the value that they do. Yes.
You know, of course it's valuable. I mean, shit, if your HR is not in place, I mean, you could, the Department of Health could come in, or the Department of Labor could come and close a business down because you haven't got the right things in place that your HR is responsible for. So that's valuable. But I think in a lot of areas, when you start, you know, it's as if until we figure out how much that could be worth to you, you're not actually that worried about the opportunity loss or the opportunity cost.
Yes.
You know, and I think that there's something in there, and I really believe that I think that the time I think HR is coming, like the time of HR is on its way, like, and it's like, because people it's becoming more important, and it's, yeah, I see Kevin with a big smile. I'm trying to figure out if it's maybe like I've touched a point or.
No, I'm so glad that you're saying that, Shaun, because I think, you know, from working in the environments I have as well, usually, and again, I'm also making a generalization around HR, but anything that goes wrong in the human capital area is sent to HR, and somehow they are supposed to figure it out, right? And you kind of go, okay, essentially what HR is going to do is just follow a procedure, right, to a large degree. And I think that's important because, you know, coming from a recruitment position and really pointing it out that, you know, when you say that this asset is so important, but yet you don't have someone actively involved in looking after the asset and helping drive that asset and inform what the value of that asset looks like, including recruitment, you know, it becomes questionable. And if you're saying, you know, like, large organizations don't have that type of data to kind of support what they're doing, that's a scary reality. A wonderful business opportunity.
No, I mean, I don't want to talk like, I've never worked inside some of the like mega organizations, and they may have these things, but we certainly don't see them or experience them from like having servicing them as recruitment customers. So, you know, and they, you know, I know that like some of the bigger organizations will have like sort of departmental teams trying to like, you know, fiddle with the stuff, you know, but it's definitely not at the forefront of a strategy. You know, it's definitely not right. You know, it's that I'd, you know, be fairly certain of in terms of like what the investment ratio of that looks like. And I mean, like, you know, you talk recruitment, you know, like when people are so used to recruitment done averagely that it's like, well, everyone does it this way, therefore like I kind of expect it to be this way. So I mean, what an opportunity to be like, well, if we just do this process excellently. You know, you talk about, you know, like if you were to be hiring these like senior tech skills, you know, or senior tech talent, whatever it might be, and during this interview process, because you know that they're interviewing at green bank, blue bank, light blue bank, and the new guys down the road in Cape Town, right? Whatever, you know. And so you know they're interviewing at all four. Like, imagine like the opportunity in like designing these experiences for candidates that are going that like, because they'll get the money from all four. Like, so the sort of like, they know what their market values are.
Yeah.
They're likely to go to the place that during their recruitment experience made them feel like really flipping special. And like, you know, like the little things that don't even cost your organization a lot of money. Like, you don't even have, this isn't like, you know, having to spend money on this stuff. This is like, once an interview's happened, the head of a department or somebody in the team phones the candidate that they know was in the interview with the hiring manager, say, listen, I know that you interviewed with Craig today. I'm actually in his team. If you've got any questions, man, like, here's my number. Like, you know, so it's like, you know, these things, like we try and like make these comparisons to like customer experience and employee experience and how employees have really become consumers. So we've got to treat them as such, you know. So like, you've got to really build in these journeys that make them feel like, because the expectation as a consumer, if you look at it that way, like, you know, you can be filled with opportunity. You know, there's lots of room for opportunity to do things differently and really, really well. That makes you the place that when all four of you are in war for the same person, you've now done the little extra bits to get that person in your door.
Yeah. Kevin, I'm going to throw a question at you. You know, just in terms of, again, you're at the front end of this leadership and development coaching, working at the C-suite. In light of the proximity you have to human capital resource managers, what are the challenges that they're talking about on a daily basis?
I think it comes back to recruiting, as Shaun mentioned, Craig. Very often you'll find that. What I've experienced, especially in larger organizations, is because someone is really good at a skill, they anticipate that person is going to be great at leadership, and that's not necessarily the case. So that is one thing that organizations get wrong very often. And the second part of that is when they do put someone in a leadership position, especially, you know, through a succession planning kind of process, they forget to do the actual succession planning, or they're not. It's not done well enough or thoughtful enough. So, you know, I think they very often. I do see large organizations, and we've mentioned some of the ones I've worked with, that they have really robust succession planning in place. And when you see that, then you can see that there's a trend, there's a movement towards getting it right. But generally, it's not something that's considered. And, you know, I think, you know, just listening to Shaun as well, I think when you get the recruiting wrong, it's really wrong. You know, so I think that's probably a massive criteria and area. But also, you know, back to the point about if this is your asset, like, who's looking after the asset, and how is, you know, the human capital person really driving the asset forward for that environment? What is the strategy? What is it? How is it supporting what the business is actually looking at doing for that year? So there's so many factors that play into it. But again, like Shaun was saying, it's a big gap. You know, people don't take recruitment seriously. And I mean, you mentioned 150 days, and like, if it's such a pressing matter, you know, like, why is that? Why is it still 150 days? And why are people not actually getting to it quicker? So there's a lot of factors that play into it. But I think there's that's why, you know, people like us have jobs, so because we make it up.
And you know, I don't want to come across as necessarily the belittler of HR. It's quite the opposite. I think that it's more that organizations haven't seen the benefit of it enough. And that because there are unbelievable HR people out there. Like, I mean, we have access to, and some of our customers, the problem is that, like, even our excellent HR customers are under-resourced because there's not enough resource being put into HR, you know? And so then HR is stretched. Hey? Like, I mean, the HR departments are so stretched. It's like hire, fire, disciplinary, you know, like they get boxed into these areas whereby, like, all the strategic stuff always feels like the last thing on the priority list, because the other shit is really, really important. But you know what I mean? Like it's like a chicken and egg issue. It's like, oh God, guys, like I want to make this organization more strategic and make you long-term money, but you're making me sit over here in the CCMA, you know? And like, so it's so interesting as to like just like if it were brought back just a little bit as to like what is the purpose of the HR in your business, you know? And then the HR, you know, another thing we've also recently really been trying to like push out there is that like look, like if you think, I'd love to, you know, the statistics in some businesses to like how much do they spend on the development of executives in certain departments, or even your hypers, right? Your high performers in different departments, finance, ops, sales, etc., versus then HR. And what do those high performance paths look like in HR? Are they going to go into data and this and this and this, but you're spending MBAs on your head of your sales hypers because your perceived return on investment in those particular areas feels more than here.
Yeah.
And so often, and you know what I mean? And it's almost like leave that there for thought rather than like that I have the answer, you know, like, but I bet you like there's in very, very few businesses are the career paths inside HR as sexy as, they might look like in ops or sales or marketing or whatever it might be, you know. So and I think that's just there's again opportunity, and I think that like you know, that's why we are the like advocate for HR. Like I mean, we've worked on like how do we build HR brand? How do we help HR tell better stories of why they matter? Because then once people identify that they matter a lot and they can make influence, so then they'll use them more. So anyway, so there's, you know, that's and again, all of this underpinned HR is like, again, recruitment, war on talent, all these things. And I mean, you know, you wouldn't have to go too far, Kevin or Craig, in terms of any of your customers to have ask them as to like, what are the biggest struggles you have in your business? And finding the right people will be at the top.
Yeah. So I think it's also really about organizations understanding that to attract the top performers, it's a comprehensive approach, not just around new employees, but employee retention. That so often is left out of the conversation and the war for talent. It's about growth. It's definitely about development. It's absolutely about diversity as well. And then engagement and getting the work-life balance in place. And all of those components really contribute to the enablement of bringing in the right talent and keeping the right talent that you have.
You missed a word there. I think that it's also something that doesn't get used a lot, but you talk about like advocacy. So like employee advocacy in terms of like when you've done all these things and you've got high performers and you treat them well and they have all these things that like, it's like you know, it's like people talk, you know, and like when they've got a good story to tell of their own personal experience, the advocacy is so mega.
Yeah.
You know, like high performance, it's like tribalism, you know, like high performers generally stick together. They like these, you know, like you find that's how the societies sort of figure themselves out, you know. And so like when you've got strong advocacy from your internal thing, well, then you've already got half the battle's done.
The battle one, yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
When he comes to the Brown Saturday and he's like, yes, I flipping can't stand my XYZ. Well, shit, bro, come check what's happening, what we're doing. Like, you know, this is what's happening at our company. They do 1, 2, 3. Like I know, like my blah blah blah, you know, whatever. And you get what I'm saying? Like there's just, again, like that's an HR job. How are we building advocacy inside of our own? So rather than just keeping them, how do we get our own people bringing people in because they believe in us and they believe in this business and they believe in the values of our leadership and they, you know, all these things. And you know why I think it's done bad? I don't think it's done badly. Why I don't think that it's always done excellently is because that is hard work. That is the hard stuff, you know, and you think that in my priority list of getting things done, the excellence in those departments is, you know, the excellence in those departments maybe is like at the bottom of the list because I've got to like fix the spreadsheet first, you know, and I think that's, you know, when we were talking earlier in this thing that we're trying to build, like we're saying it's like the reason you get out of like a Rolls Royce, and I've never been in one, but it was the example we were using is that like, when you go into or took any like super fancy car and like the things happen without you even doing it. So like the seat warmer comes on because it was cold and it picks it up and you didn't even have to press seat warm and it just was warm and you go like, shit, that moment, that moment is like, and then when you've got to go back to your skadonk and you've got to turn the seat warmer on, like, flip, man. I wish this thing thought for me. It's like those hard things. And so when you do things for people and you intentionally are like going the extra mile, like, yes, it's hard work, but your long-term return on effort is so mega, and it's because leadership is hard. Go ask the Springboks, you watch Chasing the Sun. Do you think the depth of where they get to become world champion is the easy route? It's the hardest route, but you can see that's why I love sports psychology as an analogy, is that like sport is such a wonderful thing because it's so easy to see winning and losing. In our businesses, it's hard to see that on a daily basis. You don't really see that sort of, you don't see the winning and losing every day or every Saturday, but the return on effort is mega, and like the hard road often in the long term wins, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. But again, like if your HR is stretched and they can't do the like tiny details and they're recruiting 30 roles and there's one person and nobody's ever going to get the like excellence that's required for your brand to win the war on talent. And I think that's like a nice way to kind of like close a loop there, in terms of all the things that we've sort of talked about over the last hour.
Yeah.
So, as we end today's show, guys, Shaun, it's been absolutely wonderful having you here and sharing some of your insights. Craig, I know that you normally do a bit of a sort of synopsis of what we've spoken about. What are you taking away from what Shaun has shared? And then, Shaun, if you could just share 2 or 3 kind of awarenesses that we really need to be aware of for businesses out there.
Yeah, Kevin, for me again, in the last little survey I gave there, it was really, I think, an important statement relative to understanding that it's in trying to attract the right talent. It's not just about the external view. You've got to look into the business as well, because it really it's about retaining some of the best talent. Because in the war for talent is that good talent's going to leave and go elsewhere. So what organizations doing to retain the best talent? What are they doing around growth and development of their people? What is the diversity, equity, inclusion principle saying about that organization? And then, definitely the work-life balance. But also it's really about understanding that employee value proposition isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's when you looking to create the scope for that particular candidate, it's ensuring that you have access to the data to build a better employee value proposition for that particular cohort group or that individual in that moment in time. The catch-all EVPs are definitely just foundational. You've got to be able to leverage and as with an equalizer effect, dial the different components of the EVP up in place to ensure that that employee value proposition appeals to that potential employee for that moment in time. Creating new approaches to recruitment and looking at building an authentic culture. The values of the drivers and culture of the drivers. And Shaun knows that I talk a lot around values of the organization. And when those things are aligned, talent is going to look in. And the better you're aligned in that regard, the better the chance of you having stickiness in place to bring that talent in.
Yeah. And that HR have lots of acronyms. So
add to that, Shaun. Come on.
I think for me, if there were 2 things that I could leave with anybody, is that, like, have you in your business really spend time on a strategy to recruit excellently? You know what I mean? Like, just have you spent time? And I'd almost bet that the majority of businesses and the roles that they recruit don't spend enough time on like such a critical piece. So like, and that could be simple. So the recruitment piece, I think, is just such a big opportunity that costs you nothing, costs you no money, to sit down and think really, really stringently about like how we recruit, why we recruit, and the processes we do so. So I think that's one thing that I think is a really cool sort of takeaway. And the other one would be, in our organizations, like, are we really spending the money or investing the time and energy into the people that are meant to be looking after our assets? And I think that there's a lot to be said as to sort of like, and there's probably a lot to unpack for every leader, right? Every CEO, MD, whatever it might be, to like really like think of like, what is it that I want out of a people function? Like, Do I want administration? Cool. Then spend money on administration. But like, what does people need? And like, what is the gap between what I expect my leaders to be doing for this organization and how HR could create enablement or capability for these leaders? You know, because it kind of, in modern day, specifically South Africa, the leaders have been dumped with HR. I'm sure you see this. I'm sure you see this a lot, that like all these things that sit under a KPI of what potentially like a great HR department could be do are now just expected onto like the leadership, you know, and then HR do admin and they do CCMA and they do disciplinaries and they go to, and, you know, and they hire, you know, and we see that trend so often. And so I think that that's just something that I think could be, you know, because if you do it properly, the enablement of your leadership rather than the dumping on leadership creates a lot of value, you know, and that would be my others is to like, you know, have you thought that through? And if not, like, you know, there's so much cool stuff out there, you know, like you don't even need to hire the HR person, go read as to like what it could do for you. And, or, you know, anyway, those would be my two takeaways. I think the space is ripe for the taking in terms of like creating a competitive edge for your business, should you choose to.
Yeah. Brilliant. And involve your HR department in the strategy, right? Like make time for it. I love that. It's customary to end the show off with a quote for the day, and I think it might be a bit cheesy, but it's relevant. If you think it's expensive to hire a professional, wait until you hire an amateur. Read a day, see that?
Yeah. Cool, man. And also, yeah, I'm like Craig started off with, I'm super excited for voting tomorrow. I feel like tomorrow, even if that might not be the result to change, it might just be the momentum change to the future. So I'm excited for tomorrow. I'm chuffed for our country. Like we're going in the right direction.
Fantastic. I love that. Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'm an eternal optimist for my sins. So I'm looking forward to what potentially this could mean for people and for the vision of where we're going as a country. So yeah, Shaun Raaff, he's the CEO of Humanity SA. Guys, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. Thanks for the insights.
Thanks, guys. Have a lekker.
Thanks, Shaun. Appreciate it.
See you soon.
Ciao,
yeah,
ciao.
thanks, guys. Ciao, bye.